Everybody, so this morning we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 17. And I know like I said, we put a lot of people on the prayer list here and there. We take some off now and again, but definitely keep praying. You know, the Bible tells us to pray without ceasing. God listens and He hears all of our prayers. He knows all of our hearts. And He knows, you know, if you're telling somebody you're going to pray for them, adamantly pray for them, you know what I mean? Because, you know, it doesn't do any good if you go, I'm going to pray for you, and then you don't lift a word up to God in their defense of the trials and tribulations that they're going through.
It's kind of like the same thing as setting this on a shelf and letting it collect dust and it never get read.
Well, it's become an excuse, an escape.
Exactly right.
Somebody tells you their problems, and well, I'll pray for that, and that excuses you to leave and get out of the conversation without actually providing any help or
comfort or assurance that God's got it under control.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So all those that we did put on our prayer list, again, keep them in prayer, and honestly go to God in prayer about these situations and problems, because they are, some of them are in dire need of your prayer, you know.
And a lot of people out there have things they're dealing with that they never tell anybody.
Absolutely. Keep those people in prayer too. Don't know what it is, you know, might be embarrassment, might be pride, might be any other type of tactic that, you know, the devil's got under his belt and loop to throw out there, and he will. So anyway, 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1, we're going to start there this morning. We're not going to get all the way through
this. Didn't we last week?
I don't think so. I think we just read all the way down to it.
Finished up 16.
16, yeah.
Yeah, we finished up 16 for sure. So, anyway, I'm going to start there in verse 1. Does anybody want to read besides myself? Somebody want to start reading there?
Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will rise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee, and I will strike only the king. Then I will bring back all the people to you. When all return except the man whom you seek, all the people will be at peace." And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he says too." And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him, saying, "Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up." So Hushai said to Absalom, "The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. For," said Hushai, "you know from your father and his men that they are mighty men, and they are enraged in their minds like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is a man of war and will not camp with the people. Surely by now he is hidden in some pit or in some other place. And it will be when some of them are overthrown at first, that whoever hears of it will say, 'There is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom.' And even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Therefore I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea, for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew falls on the ground. And of him and all the men who are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we will pull it into the river until there is not one small stone found there. So Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel, for the Lord has purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. So, what do we see going on right here? We see that Absalom has what? Has
He's
called
called on his two
advisors, right?
Ahithophel's advice was actually the better advice.
In what way, Rick?
In the way that before David could organize and get set up, he was going to fall on him.
A strategic,
Strategic strike.
right?
While, David was weary, he hadn't got everything set up.
Weak, no food, traveling. All the people were not organized.
Right, but Hushai, being in league with David and the Lord guiding him, gave him different advice, which allowed David to rest and reorganize and basically set up for incoming war.
Right. So last Sunday we talked in 2 Samuel chapter 16, we talked about how David prayed to the Lord and did what? He asked for Ahithophel's advice to beat Absalom as what? Foolishness, right? It's foolishness, right? And so we see God working and God's power working in these two forms of advice given to Absalom by his two advisors, right? So we see God's power and God's innovation, God's knowledge of all things that are going on this earth right here. We see it. We see also,
Like Rick said, militarily speaking,
absolutely,
that's when we want to attack, when they're
weak and when they're disarrayed and they're
whatever.
not organized, whenever they don't have no defense. We want to be able to take that as an advantage.
Civil War would have been won if Lee's generals would have followed his orders and they wouldn't have rested and given the Yankees a chance to regroup.
Right. And so we see that Hushai disagreed with Ahithophel. Okay, but
you're always going to have a negative and a positive. The positive, the God outweighs the negative.
absolutely.
And that's usually God gives advice from a source that God Himself to the individual to give to the other who's trying to push this negativity and say, hey, let's strategically hit.
Right, absolutely. Take them at their weakness.
He was acting with God's inspiration or assistance to try to save David.
Yes.
Not maybe.
It was God's plan after He heard David's prayer and his plea for help. It was God's plan to have Hushai give advice that would be taken by Absalom over Ahithophel because of the fact that it was in the moment that Absalom was thinking that, hey, the reason why he wants to do this is because of the last words there where he said let's see, right there where it says, so Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel, for the Lord has proposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster upon Absalom. So you see Absalom's train of thought right there. Okay, you see what his train of thought there is. It says so we know that Hushai went and called upon his second advisor. Absalom called on his second advisor, Hushai, and it said it is remarkable evidence of the hand of God and answers to David's prayer in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 31, that Absalom even asked for another opinion after such wise, well-received counsel. Because you know that Absalom has seen Ahithophel give so much advice to his father, and that advice through the years has been prominently good advice. So he was a good advisor, and Absalom knew that. But because it was God's design and God's wish that was his plan that Absalom give this advice, this foolish advice, it planted the seed for Absalom to have a second opinion. You see what I'm saying? So we see here it says, we can imagine that Hushai's heart sank when he heard of the smart plan Ahithophel suggested. He had to quickly think of a counter plan so that he could defeat the counsel of Ahithophel, as David asked him to do in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 32 through 35. And that is where we know that David prayed to the Lord. It says, now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshiped God, there was Hushai the Archite coming to him with his robe torn and dust on his head. And David said to him, if you go with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I was your father's servant previously, so I will now also be your servant, then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me. And do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priest with you there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell to Zadok and Abiathar the priest. So we see that, again, like Brother Rick said, in the process of all this happening, it gave David time to think about and to form a plan as to what he was going to do when Absalom got this advice. So, but can you only imagine after hearing what Abiathar said, after Ahithophel said, again, how Hushai had to come up with something, because he knew that he wanted to serve the king. And he had to make it sound as if it was better than what Ahithophel had said. But we know that God had a hand in that.
Yes, very much.
So
had Absalom been smart, he would have looked to the motives.
right,
He would have known that Ahithophel had
a different agenda.
beef
Yeah,
with David, and
over past stuff that happened
Yeah.
with Bathsheba. So.
and
Well, we see here that Hushai, again, like you said, was giving David time. Because he knew that David was not ready. He knew that there would be a massive slaughter. He knew that the people would join Absalom. So,
I think God also kind of closed or darkened Absalom's mind because he wasn't a man of faith.
right,
He wasn't like David, his father, and, here he had the best advice possible and then an excuse, but yet he went with the one that said to wait over the one that said attack now. While they're weary, while they've run, while all this is going on, hit them and hit them hard.
right.
And that would have been the smarter military move.
Absolutely. But another thing, too, to point out also is that another reason I think that Absalom took Hushai's advice over Ahithophel's was also because, what did he say over here? I want to say I read part of it. It said that one of the reasons Absalom liked Hushai's advice was because it appealed to his vanity. It made him look that much more better than David as king. So it put him at like a higher standing than the king, and it would show more favor in people's eyes.
While David was humble,
Right.
and allowed whatever his name was, to curse him and everything,
Yeah.
and didn't care how he looked in everybody's
Everybody else's
eyes,
eyes.
because his mighty men wanted to go slice the dude up.
Right.
And David said, no,
Let him
speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's continue on there. I know we don't have much longer, but we'll continue on. Anybody else want to read, or do you want me to read? Okay, it says, Then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, Thus and so Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have advised. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, Do not spend the night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed at Rogel, for they dared not to be seen coming into the city. So a female servant would come and tell them, and they would go and tell King David. Nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom, but both of them went away quickly and came to a man's house in Baram, who had a well in his court, and they went into it. Then the woman took the spread covering over the well's mouth and spread ground grain on it, and the thing was not known. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? So the woman said to them, They have gone over the water brook. And when he had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. Now it came to pass, after they had departed, that they came up out of the well and went and told King David and said to David, Arise and cross over the water quickly, for thus has Ahithophel advised against you. So David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed over the Jordan. By morning light, not one of them was left who had not gone over the Jordan. Now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hanged himself and died, and he was buried in his father's tomb. Then David went to Mahanaim. Isn't that how you say it? Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the army instead of Joab. This Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Jethro, an Israelite, who had gone to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. Now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim that Shobai, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the people of Ammon, Machar, the son of Amiel, from Lu-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought beds and basins, earthen vessels, and wheat, barley, and flour, parched grain and beans, lentils, and parched seeds, the honey and curds, sheep and cheese of the herd for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, The people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Okay. So we see here that David is warned by Absalom, right, about Absalom's plan. Okay, it says, Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, this is exactly what David had in mind whenever he sent Hushai the priest back to Absalom. It was to make sure that, that David would be able to find out what Absalom's plans were going to be. And so David is warned. So Jonathan and Ahimaaz could find help along the way. The whole nation had not gone over to Absalom, especially because he had publicly disgraced David's concubines, right? We We know that from the past chapters. So we also see that Ahithophel commits suicide, right? Why do you think he did that? Anybody? Can anybody tell me right quick?
He was afraid of David or ashamed of things he did.
Because he had been dishonored by Absalom not taking his advice.
That's correct.
Absolutely. It says Ahithophel did not kill himself over hurt feelings because his counsel was rejected. Instead, he was wise enough to know that under Hushai's plan, Absalom would fail and Ahithophel would be implicated in the conspiracy. He knew all was lost. Because he knew once this plan failed, he would be figured out, that he had that grudge, like Brother Rick said earlier, about what David had done in past sins. So, Absalom crosses the Jordan to pursue David. We know that we saw this in verses 24 through 26. It says, now Absalom was the head of Israel's army. This was good for Absalom's vanity, but bad for success on the battlefield. Absalom's vanity ensured his ruin, because a lot of time when pride and vanity gets in your way, guess what happens? You fail.
Yes.
God doesn't like that, So,
Well, he had lost already because he wasn't a godly man.
Right.
And God was against him.
absolutely, from the beginning.
If God be against you, it doesn't matter who is
For you.
for you.
Absolutely.
Or where you are, it's
It says Shobai, Merchar, and Barzillai. These otherwise obscure men are given special mention because they helped David in a time of great need. Friends in need are friends indeed. You ever heard that saying?
Yes.
So,
Very much.
it says the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. These helpers of David were not dramatic warriors, but they helped David in this crisis as much as the bravest soldier could. They were specially sent by God to comfort David in his affliction or in times whenever he needed them most, because he knew all that traveling, all the crossing of the Jordan, all that stuff was going to take the wind out of their sails, and they would be weak and they would be weary and they'd be full of doubt and would need some kind of assurance and food. So we see that God provided. And it's just like in the military, and I'll say this and we'll close, it's just like in the military, Brother Roger can affirm this, is, we always say that, we have people in the rear with the gear. Well, those people in the rear with the gear that are, making hot chow, that are making sure that all the vehicles are fueled up, that are making sure all the vehicles are running, that are making sure all the weapons are cleaned, that are making sure all the weapons are ready and hot and ready to go. Guess what? Those people are just as important as the ones out there on the front line. Because guess what?
If not more so.
That's right. Because you can't win a war if you don't have those people back there. You just can't do it. So
Doesn't matter how many men you got out there, if the rifles don't fire or the ordnance isn't hot,
it's not. That's right. You
might as well just have a rock or a sword or a knife.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm going to leave you with this, and it's said by Mayer. It says, it was as though God stooped over that stricken soul, and as the blows of the rod cut long furrows in the sufferer's back, the balm of Gilead was poured into the gaping wounds. Voices spoke more gently, hands touched them more softly. Pitiful compassion reigned tender across assurance with his path, and better than all, the bright hardness angels of God's protection encamped about his path and his lying down for rest. So, any questions on 2 Samuel chapter 17?
Sounds like there's a lot of two-faced people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what, Ralph, we see that here today in our present time as well. Things haven't changed much, have they, guys?
No.
So, but we all know that God is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-hearing. He knows everyone's hearts. He knows who's going to come to him. He's going to know who's prays for him.
That's right.
He knows all. He knows what kind of situation that you're going to be put in. He knows what kind of trial and tribulations you're going to go through. And he's there. You just have to call upon him in times of distress and stuff like that. So he will be there for you, just like he was for David and them, Israel at this time. So if there's nothing else, Brother Ralph, will you close us in a word of prayer, sir?
Father, thank you for the day you've given us, for your word, and how we can apply it to our lives.
Yes, sir.
Be with us, be
Yes,
preaching service and service to follow. Pray, Lord, about this food, that you will open the door when you see fit. And we'll be ready to serve. Bless each of these that have been mentioned today that are heard and touched and heal within your power in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.